lot of politics to cover, a lot of extra political sideshow stuff to cover. But, that's what we do here. Thanks for coming to the Mark Thompson Show. And, Mark will be back next Monday, but Michael's hanging out with you today.
Hey, good to be with you, Michael. You always do a great job. And yeah, there's no, come on, let's just be honest. We've never seen news cycles like this in politics, at least in my lifetime. You can't get away from it. Even as I say it, you better have your phone on at 2:30 on a Sunday morning, because who knows what's going to happen. That's just the reality of it. It's crazy. It drives a lot of people in the news business, in my own newsrooms, nuts. What are we actually going to cover today? And I don't know. You just wonder how the average person, do they take in 15% of this stuff, Michael? Who knows?
Yeah, and who has the time to? Because by the time you're trying to absorb, by the time you're at 4% and you want to get to 15%, there's something else distracting you and taking you and making it more difficult. You're so right, Gary. Things that used to consume us, whether they were important pieces of news or not, breaking news doesn't even have a long life anymore, right? I find, let's look at this weekend, that the tragedy of that triple-masted ship hitting the Brooklyn Bridge, right? We would have been glued to that for a day or so anyway, but then we have somebody coming in and making comments about a former president's cancer diagnosis. And then Sunday night, we get a vote out of the House. And then, then we move to all the other distractions that are created. It's hard to keep our focus on things that are important. And I think it's also frustrating for people in Congress who are trying to do, without being cynical about Congress, people are trying to do whatever work they're doing for whatever constituency. People aren't paying attention. They're only paying attention to headlines now.
Yeah. And, it's important to step back. I think you make an important point here, Mike. It's important to step back and talk about it. Just for example, a 10 p.m. Sunday night vote on the president, what is going to be his signature piece of legislation for these 4 years.
Yeah.
So how much scrutiny, in other words, is that bill getting on a Sunday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, right? Not very much, right? Because who's staffed in the newsrooms? Who at home is watching this? And that's important. There's going to be a lot of things now. We'll get under a much bigger microscope actually when it gets over to the Senate, which I presume at some point it will. Speaker Johnson would like that to happen this week. We'll see. But there's going to be important things to talk about in that bill, right? Because this is going to be the so-called one big beautiful bill that's going to define Trump's legislative legacy. And there's things in there that people are going to want to know about and talk about.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. We're on it, and we talked about it, at the top of the show a little bit, just sort of the big picture stuff that happened. And I agree with you. It's going to get to the Senate. It will be, it'll be chopped up. It'll come back to the House, and I can't see how the House, as we know it, the Republican side is going to support what comes back from the Senate. But stranger things have happened. But the pure politics of this, even if you're a conservative Republican, you still have to run for re-election. And there are purple districts in this country. And it's difficult for many Republicans to support some of these sharp cuts that are happening, because that's when voters step in, because these cuts don't know party or politics. So you can say clean energy cuts, there are over 600 billion of them, are maybe not as partisan, but student loan cuts, over 300 billion, food stamp cuts, over 300 billion, big major cuts to Medicare. They're saying nearly $700 billion. So these types of cuts are the kind of cuts that are going to play politics, aren't they?
Well, they are, but let's take the one thing you kind of said, well, this isn't so partisan. A bunch of the things you're talking about, Michael, will have big ramifications for people trying to run those purple districts. But just take that so-called clean energy piece, right?
Yeah.
A conservative Republican from the Midwest has come out today and said, hey, not so fast. My area of the country is very concerned about wind energy. A lot of wind turbines have gone up in the Midwest, and biofuels, right? Corn, ethanol-based biofuels. They don't want to see those chopped out of federal spending. So this is not going to be easy sledding, either getting these through moderate Republicans who are staring down tough re-election battles next year, but even conservative Republicans in these red districts who may not be threatened politically, but don't want to go back to their constituents and say, well, yeah, I guess you corn farmers are out of luck. They don't want to have to do that.
Yeah, there's no question, and I didn't even mean to gloss over it. I'm talking about what, the issues that hit voters of every stripe. So, and clean energy, while important, and it fluctuates in importance as to when you ask voters what their number one issue is. But yeah, in practical terms, clean energy is a massive industry, and it employs many, many people, and it doesn't know politics when it comes to what district, as you said, Gary, wind turbines go up in some of, because of all the wide open spaces in some of the reddest parts of this country, and they employ people, and they bring a lot of value added to those districts. So the members of Congress are loath to go against them because of what that would mean to them in re-election, and that's the currency of their business, right?
Right, absolutely. And then, I don't know if we're going to touch on this or not, but just to go back to that news cycle thing, I mean, the whipsaw over former President Biden in the last 3 or 4 days. I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely remarkable, right? I mean, you've got, of course, people in his own party. The Tapper book comes out, I guess, officially tomorrow, although half of it, like, it's already been leaked. That has a lot of Democrats even more incensed. Now, all of a sudden, the cancer diagnosis comes out for the former president. That's tragic in its own right, again. But does that now officially sort of put to bed the whole Biden argument internally to Democrats that say, okay, listen, this proves it. He was old. Thank goodness. What if he had this cancer diagnosis when he's 3 months into a new term, right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's just unbelievable. That thread right there, could consume half of every newscast over the next week, and there probably won't be time for that to happen.
No, it won't. I mean, look at, like, they released the tapes of that interview with the special prosecutor, special counsel, and that's faded into the ether now, right? I mean, those are sort of things that would have legs and matter. I guess because in practical sense, it doesn't matter either. Whatever. Joe Biden's no longer president. Donald Trump is president, and the things that happened, and that's real Democratic self-haranguing and hand-wringing, and the party thinking, did we do it right? Did we not do it right? But the mere fact that would have been compelling at another time. And I blame the media too. I mean, I'm part of the media, and the way that newsrooms select which stories they're going to cover and for how long. And then they also are the ones that have the attention spans of goldfish sometimes too, where they turn around and they look at the next shiny object. But I want to go, and the Biden stuff, but we can stay on it for a moment here. I don't want to leave the big, beautiful bill, as the president calls it, but in terms of Biden, and in terms of what this means, I'm wondering, and because I think fairly optimistically sometimes, does the vulnerability of Biden as finally an older, sick man kind of take down the volume on criticizing him at every turn for a lot of his most virulent opponents? Do you think that can happen?
Well, I think there's two things happening, Michael. One is, I think, for some people, this is going to go ahead and put the icing on the cake. See, we told you he was old, in fact, really old. Now he's got a potentially life-threatening infirmity. We'll see where his, prognosis goes. But, I think for some people, it's like, okay, Joe was old. Now we know the HER tapes have come out, the cancer diagnosis. Yeah, let's just forget about that. But I'll take matters a lot for, and that is for the people who are closest to him, who have a political future, i.e. Kamala Harris. Okay. This is a big deal for her still, and it's not going to be easily put to bed, because the questions, Joe's not running again for anything, obviously, but those closest to him, I'd pick out two figures in particular, Michael. One is Kamala Harris, who, of course, right now is weighing either California governor or 2028. And one of those two, I'm convinced she's going to go for. I have my own, sort of inclinations about that. We'll save that for another day. But she's got a political future. The other one is Chuck Schumer. And is he going
I'm going to interrupt you here for 1 second, Gary. As a reporter, when I'm interviewing a politician, they say, we'll save that for another day. I cannot not interrupt and say, no, we're here today. We're talking. I want to know what Gary Dietrich's inclinations here are about the former vice president.
Yeah. I mean, there was a new report that came out over the weekend. She's here, she's there, she's everywhere. Honestly, Michael, it could go either way. My gut tells me she's more likely to run for California governor. Number one, she's more of a sure thing there. Not a certainty by any stretch of the imagination, but I think far more certain to win that office than she is 2028 presidential at this point. And secondly, it's there right now, right? I mean, does she want to wait 3.5 years? That's a long time in politics, especially as we've been talking about today, an eternity in modern politics. I think she jumps into the California governor's race. That's my gut about it, but she could go either way. So that's the deal.
I agree with you. I completely agree. And sorry to put you on the spot there, but let's but you started to talk about Senator Schumer when I interrupted you. So
okay. I mean, I just think the other person, along with Harris, who was so close to the president, of course, and defended him to the hilt. Maybe she felt like she had to, but now she is Ricky Ricardo family. She said has some splaining to do. All right, but the other one is Chuck Schumer. I mean, I think he's in a very, very tenuous position. Anybody who says, well, Chuck didn't know, come on. He was talking to the White House constantly. And I think this thing about a potential primary for him, or people really saying, Chuck, your time is done. Either AOC is going to take you out or it's time for you to retire. I think that's very real. And, I think he's the other guy that probably politically right now, it has the most vulnerability still sitting out there due to Biden.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it also speaks a little bit to our politics in this country in general, not the politics themselves, but the way we are, as we hate to abandon somebody, whether that's human nature or not. But certainly in politics, you don't want to be the person who steps in and says Biden shouldn't run, right? Because that will come back to haunt you with the rest of the Democrats. I think Schumer, to his credit, was a little pushier than others about it. And in terms of rhetoric, he also served with Biden and knew Biden for a very long time. And it puts people in very, very odd positions. I agree that I don't know that I think I'm thinking as I'm speaking, but in my opinion, I think that Schumer's more likely not to run if he's going to be primaried, or to step down from leadership, which I think would kind of avoid a primary if he wants to stay in the Senate, because there are people that he likes that want that job as well. I think of Brian Schatz, the senator from Hawaii, possibly Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, but I think less so. So I do think that there are ways that Chuck Schumer gets out of the conundrum he's in, if you want to call it that. I don't believe he thinks he's in one, but that's the problem with politics, is that politicians, they don't realize it until it's too late very often.
Yeah, he clearly doesn't think he's in one. But I'll tell you, a good half of his party, with this giant capital progressive, in front of their name, do. I mean, he's become the face of angst for the progressives right now. Much more so than Hakeem Jeffries, who doesn't have the kind of, some people would say, political maneuvering room. Although really, the Republicans right now are making it really tough on Schumer to gain any traction, even in the Senate, on things. He can pound the podium, but in terms of actual tools, if they're able to use reconciliation on the big beautiful bill, then that takes weapons out of his hands. But he right now, if people are looking for sort of a political whipping boy, it's clear it's Schumer right now. We'll see what happens 12, 18 months from now.
Yeah, and I also think that look, having a man in his mid-70s looking over reading glasses, standing at the podium, is not the look Democrats want right now. And I don't mean that as an indictment to people who would need to do that and look over reading glasses and whatever. But I think that the party is realizing they need to be younger than Joe Biden, their last standard bearer, and they need to go forward with a little more energy. And the same old is not going to work. So I think that it's beyond just what the Republicans and others are doing to Schumer. Look, it's not an easy job to have, to be a minority leader of either house, but I do think that there's something to be said for the optics of what the Democrats want to portray. It's more like Hakeem Jeffries and less like Chuck Schumer, I think.
Yep, I think you're exactly right.
Let's awkwardly go back to that bill, because we left it before we talked a little bit about it, because I want to talk about what it means on a state level, and the SALT part of this. If you could explain that and tell me why you have Republicans in California and Republicans in New York who could make trouble for this bill when it comes back to the House.
Yeah. Well, SALT for people, don't think back to the Reagan days with the SALT nuclear treaties.
Right.
This is state and local taxes. That's what that acronym stands for. And why it's a big deal in blue states is deductibility of those taxes. Okay. Especially for high income earners. How much is that going to be included in the Trump tax provisions, part of the big beautiful bill? How much is it not? That's the big bugaboo. And yes, even Republicans in some of these blue states say, wait a minute, I got some wealthy donor types who want these deductions basically in there and in large amounts. Okay. The
Yeah.
state tax deduction. That's what that's about. And the other big thing sitting out there that's a real problem, even as Gavin Newsom presented his own California state budget last week, is these potentially very large Medicaid cuts. Gavin Newsom already announced he's cutting $5-6 billion out of California's budget, putting a cap on, saying no more undocumented folks can jump into Medicaid as of January 1 this coming year. All this is going to be a huge problem. I mean, I think those are the two big things sitting out there for blue state people that are probably the most, have the biggest red flags on them right now.
And it's so important because those are the things that may end up upending this bill when it comes back to the House. Maybe even getting out of the House, it's going to be trouble because you've got a couple of Nick LaLota and Mike Lawler. You have two New York Republicans who have spoken against it because of that reason. Even in California, you've had a couple. Ken Calvert, I think, has been talking about how he has problems with it, a California rep, and one, I don't know if it was Valadeo or one of the other Republicans who were saying that they have problems with it as well in California. So when you talk about just a couple of Republicans, you have to realize that's what can make the difference on a vote in this House, in this so evenly divided House of Representatives right now, which is interesting. You brought up Governor Newsom. I think important. We talked about the governor's race. We talked about the presidential race. One of the reasons that Kamala Harris, I believe, would run for governor before she would run for president is that it's fairly clear that Governor Newsom will run for president in 2028. I mean, I believe that that's going to happen. And I think I'm not alone. That going up against his fundraising in this state for people who've already written big checks to Kamala Harris, who will have written them for her presidential race, who didn't get what they wanted. I think that Gavin Newsom has a leg up in his home state. Running against another California would not necessarily be the best thing for the former vice president. Tell me about where you like. There's not a news cycle that goes by without Gavin Newsom doing something subtle or something major in terms of national policy. Right now, he's talking about immigrants and healthcare. What do you make of all that?
Well, his immigrant and healthcare take last week, which is, again, this cutting of $6 billion out of Medicaid directed towards undocumented folks, in many people's view, continues what Gavin Newsom's been doing this year, which is pushing towards the center, pushing more moderate. I mean, that's something that conservatives want to see happen. What do you announce, right? So his podcast with Charlie Kirk and all the rest of the conservatives, I mean, saying to Kirk on that podcast, yeah, I think it's, it's deeply unfair that there's trans males in women's sports. I mean, all of these things combined are what many people are saying. Look, of course, he's getting ready to run in purple states. He's got to get the Midwest tier, the northern tier. He's got to say this stuff. And, you can't have, San Francisco, California liberal Kamala Harris. He does not want to be in that mold. That is Gavin Newsom, right? So,
but is the cake not already baked on Gavin Newsom? I mean, or do we have that perspective? I mean, he was the mayor of San Francisco himself, and he is somebody who was, to his great credit on social issues, ahead of the curve, ahead of Barack Obama on gay marriage, ahead of Joe Biden. I mean, so it seems as if all of the sort of liberal, progressive, whatever word you want to use, currency that he has built up is seems like that's already baked in, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. I mean, the Newsom people obviously think differently. They think they're short minds in politics. And after all, they're going to say we're 3.5 years from a presidential election. A lot can happen then, right? I mean, he continues to set himself up as the anti-Trump voice. Remember, that was how he kind of cut his teeth over the last year, going on Hannity, debating Governor DeSantis from Florida. I mean, so he's kind of got this twofold thing he's trying to do. One is, listen, I'm the best advocate you've got against MAGA Trumpism. And, oh, by the way, I might be more palatable liberal than you guys think. So I don't know that the second half of that is really selling very well. And there's an interesting poll that came out from the LA Times that 2/3 of Californians now say he is spending too much time on non-California matters. He's basically running for president. We need a governor. What gives? I mean, this California, the Los Angeles fire rebuild is sitting out there, not to mention a $12 billion budget gap in the coming fiscal year. There's a lot of people, really starting to scream through some pretty loud megaphones. Hey, Gavin, by the way, you're still governor for almost 2 more years.
Right. I mean, that's the catch that anyone who was in that office. I remember Mike Dukakis when he was running for president. He spent every day in Boston as governor of Massachusetts, and he got criticized like crazy from the National Party. Why are you still governor? This is not going to be your job soon, or you go back to it. But for a while, you have to take a time out. So it's kind of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't in that way. And I think mentally that Newsom has moved past that a little bit, and I would imagine that if he ran for president, he would still win California. He's won it several times in recalls and otherwise. But there are plenty of surprises ahead. So Gary, thank you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for helping me and this audience digest what's going on a state level and on a national level with the bill that came out of the Congress on a late Sunday night, which is always has its charm, right? When you're at the House of Representatives, when you're on Capitol Hill late Sunday night, and all the canteens are closed, but it's and these guys are still in there, and women are doing these bills, and then they come out with it somehow. We're not going to see what the result of that was. I was talking about it with Kim earlier, and before I let you go, why don't you weigh in on this? That the notion is we don't know what changed for these 4 conservatives who voted for this bill at the end. Johnson said that it's fine. You'll learn it later or not. But you don't have to know these things, because often they're promises that are made for things down the road, right?
Yeah, well, and importantly, you and Kim may have talked about this. They did not vote in support of the bill. They voted "quote unquote" present, which means I'm here. I want my constituents to know I'm listening. I mean, and what's trickling out today is basically they were told, listen, we hear you, but we can't get this done tonight. So this is going to Rules Committee, and then it's going to, go to the full House. We will address your concerns this week. That's apparently what they were promised. And so they said, okay, we won't oppose it. We'll vote present. But that also means we ain't in support of this thing yet.
Yeah, that's a very, very important piece that you've just added that we didn't add before, which is, in fact, that they went from no votes to present, but they didn't vote in favor of it. It gets it out of committee, and that's why Arrington, the budget chair, was so happy, because it gets to the floor. But that doesn't mean that they're supporting it, and there's got to be stuff that happens between now and then that will get their support. In theory, we can assume that they were promised some of that. So thank you, Gary Dietrich, at bottom of the ninth, helping us out with the fact that we didn't go over. Gary, thanks so much. CBS Television, iHeartRadio's political analyst. You'll see Mark back here on Monday, but I hope to see you soon, Gary.
Okay, have a great show, Michael.
Thanks so much. Gary Dietrich's segment is sponsored by Bill Campbell at Remax Gold. If you're relocating into or from Northern California, you need a highly respected real estate professional like Bill Campbell of Remax Gold. Call or text Bill at 530-448-7474. That's 530-448-7474.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.